this historic space?
Well, to my knowledge, some of these dates might be incorrect, but when Bucky left in 1971, he sold the dome to Mike Mitchell.
Okay.
And then Mike used that for revenue as student housing. And so there were many, many, many students who lived there. Mm-hmm. And then in I think 2002, Bill Perk, who was head of the design department and actually came here because of Bucky, purchased the dome. And then a number of years after that, Bill and Joe Clinton and Johnny Johnson and Allegra Fuller started the RBF Dome NFP, our Buckminster Fuller Dome non-for-profit organization. Cornelius Crane was one of the first presidents. Following him was Brent Ritzel, and then following Brent was myself. One of the two of them, I think Brent, it might have been Corny, wrote a grant when Obama came into presidency, and it was an economic stimulus, and part of it was through the National Park Service, Save America's Treasures, and the grant was submitted to the National Park Service. The dome was awarded $125,000 that we needed to match, and we sat on that for a number of years without doing anything, and then we decided let's start doing something, and Thad Heckman came in, did a set of beautiful drawings, divided the work up into 3 different phases. We set the first phase out for a bid. Blair Wolfram of Dome Inc., an international dome designer and builder, was awarded the contract, and we were off and running with phase 1. That dealt with the rebuilding of a lot of the structural integrity from the dome itself. As Thad would say, you measure a dome's plumbness and squareness by the serifity, that is the surface of the dome itself, is curvilinear, is spherical points, each of the vertici that are there.
So the more like a circle it is, the more like true to the form that it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was a mess. There was one pentagon that was actually, somebody had to try to rebuild it, and they were off by 2 inches. And so it was actually caved in, and there was a 6x6 post, from the floor to the center of the pentagon holding it up. Other parts of it had been rotted out. The cork floor, since it had gone through so many students with no animal restrictions, cats and dogs, particularly cats in there, ruined the floor. But the cork upstairs is the original cork. And there was probably enough THC in the plywood, you could probably burn it and get high. So it was a real effort to get it off the ground. And it's a preservation project, which means I can't just take the window that was originally installed there, which is a single pane, has really no weather capability as far as insulating and protection per se. But I have to get one of those rebuilt, refurbished, is thousands of dollars. And so, and because it's the National Park Service, we would have to get a variance to do anything uniquely new. And we did get one that when Bucky first finished the house, the slab was cast by Paul and Ira Parrish. It was a give me a second here. Radiant floor heating, which still works, which is amazing.
Wow.
Then 8 days later, from what I understand, Bucky convinced SIU students to come over to the house on Forest and help erect the dome, because it came in triangle pieces. And there was one side of it had varnish on it. They connected them together, and then supposedly Bucky put some kind of cinematic tape over the seams. It didn't work. It leaked like a sieve. And so they put it, from that point on, they started shingling it and shingling it and shingling it. And we took about 3 layers of shingles off. But the variance we were able to get with the National Park Service was to use a membrane roof. Sometimes they're known as TPO roofs or EPDM roofs, but it's a membrane roof. It's been around Germany a long time, and not a cheap roof, but it lasts. It doesn't leak, and it looks good too.
No, that is a spot-on space for a segue, because I'm hoping that this show looks good too. Doesn't just look good, sounds good too, right? That's the whole idea on a podcast here. The WTF Carbondale one, where we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives and tie it all back to this little old place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois. Episode 64, which I just had a flash in my mind. I thought I had not changed that number over, but it is Jon Davey. I'm so appreciative of you taking the time to do this, man. Like, you've been kind of on my mind since even starting this series, and I just kind of played this out for a times right sort of deal. And when Judy had made a mention of, hey, let's, what can we do? Let's do something for the Dome. And I was like, well, let's do a podcast series. Let's start with Jon and see where we go from there. And so thanks for participating, man.
Well, you're more than welcome. This is very lovely to be here.
So you as we were talking before the show started, you came to Carbondale to be a student. Was it always architecture and building and that in your line of sight, or?
Oh wow, that goes back a long way. My first job, when I was in 3rd grade, I was living in Oklahoma City, and they were building a house down about 2 blocks away. And I would just walk down there and met the contractor and said, can I work for you? 3rd grade. And he paid me $0.25 an hour to pick up nails. So that was my first construction job, or I would say introduction into architecture. What really brought me to Carbondale were a number of things. I was going to school and high school in Mount Vernon. And I'd come down to Carbondale a lot to meet friends, to party, and to also purchase things. And then I also remember Carbondale uniquely. I ended up being drafted. I was the last of the draft. My number was 33 in the lottery. I was going to school full-time at Ren Lake. I was working full-time as a pastry chef at the top of the first in Mount Vernon. And I knew nothing about deferments and really couldn't get one those last few years anyway. So I was drafted, and I remember coming back on leave, and then the vote had changed where I could vote at that time, but I couldn't get into a bar because I was only 19. And so I came here with a girlfriend. We tried to get in Merlin's down the street. They carded me, and I was just amazed. Here I am. I'm a soldier. I've gone through basic training. I'm going to go get some more training as a tank driver, and I can't even go into a bar. So I was feeling pretty miserable about that. So we walked down the street, and about where you're sitting in the balcony, my girlfriend and I sat down, and we saw Jeremiah Johnson. That was 1973 or 72, a long time ago. But then what brought me back to Carbondale was a girlfriend. I wanted to study architecture. Then I thought about psychology, and then I had a dream, and I know this is going to sound strange. And I dreamed that all my architecture tools were given to me, and I said, well, I always wanted to be in architecture, and there was an associate degree architecture program here in Carbondale, so I applied, for it, got in, and then just kept going from there. To where I am today, and I always liked Carbondale. It was always a magic city at times, and hopefully we'll get to that once again.
That's fingers crossed, right? Adam Fletcher and I did a different a podcast, somebody else's podcast yesterday. I couldn't help but keep talking about it because I was trying to sell these guys. Hey man, Carbondale's the happening place. Like, we got this thing that it could be in another 5 or 10 years. You guys should be latched onto this. And I was talking about this video that he shared of 1980s downtown Carbondale, John Candy showing up with the NBC Roadshow, and like just the flood of people, and this building in the background, and more shots than I could count. And it was lovely to see. And it's just like that, while that amount of activity may not be here still, the spirit of it is, and we just got to keep grinding until it gets back to where it ought to be.
Yeah.
So it's cool for somebody like yourself who has, the Carbondale story, but also something that I really appreciate is that you've got a Southern Illinois story too. So are you originally from Mount Vernon? That's where you were born and raised? Or?
No, I'm a New Yorker.
Okay.
I was born in Buffalo, New York. Take a step back. My father was born in northern Rhodesia in a mud hut about 50 miles from Victoria Falls. My grandfather was a missionary in Africa. My father went to school at Swansea Wells, came to the United States on the Queen Mary when it was painted OD green with a 120 millimeter gun. He joined the Canadian Air Force, and 2 weeks after we dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they let everybody go out of the Air Force in Canada because there was no need for them at all. And he met my mother in Maine, and my father went back between radio and television and the ministry. He never put the two together. I went to 6 different grade schools, and the thing is that he was neo-orthodox in his belief. Mm-hmm. And he would say the wrong thing in the sermon Sunday morning. The board of trustees would meet in the afternoon, and he'd be fired, and we'd be looking for a new place for him to preach. What he was doing in Mount Vernon, while we were living in Oklahoma City, he landed a job as a custodian for the television station. Mm-hmm. And I remember him talking to me. He goes, they asked me, well, will you do anything else here if we ask you? And he says, absolutely. Then he went to the cameraman, and then he finally broke into the news. And when we moved to Decatur, Illinois, he had a show called Davy's Locker, which was in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. It was almost like the Action Kids or Bandstand. Uh-huh. He would bring in local groups, rock and roll groups, interview kids and the stuff. And my dad had such a low baritone voice. I mean, it's next to James Earl Jones. Mm-hmm. When he called you on the phone, you would think you were talking to God. And then he went from being the guy that had kids shows and tried to do the noon news show. Well, that's a hard. You're talking about kids and good things, and you're talking about murders and car wrecks and stuff. Yeah. It didn't work. So then he landed a job as general manager of WMIX in Mount Vernon, working for John Mitchell.
And WMIX still stands to this day, doesn't
Yep,
it?
It sure is. And back then it was easy listening. And so WMX would get all these brand new records. And I remember Dad came home one time with Led Zeppelin 1. And he goes, Johnny, we don't play these on WMX. You could have it. So I think I might have been the first kid in Southern Illinois to have Led Zeppelin 1. And I fell in love with it from that point on. But then what brought me back here is that I had spent my time in Germany. I had met a girl and while traveling over there. And I went back to Pennsylvania. She was going to State College there. And I got a job. Because I was trying to get academic, I got a job, believe it or not, in a leisure suit factory. I was the bundle boy, and I had been on a military base, a combat ready base, that there were no females, mm-hmm. So I was expecting to see, I was easy to see, all the playboys and the language and what have you. Mm-hmm. Well, I now work at a leisure suit factory, being the bundle boy. That means I move stacks of leisure suits from one point to another for them to be pressed. Mm-hmm. And then I work with all these gals cursing and reading Playgirl magazine. It was just like, okay. But I didn't work there very long. I came back and realized that Illinois treated their veterans economically and kindly. Mm-hmm. So I went back and I got academic at Wren Lake for a semester, and then came to Carbondale and started studying architecture. And it just went on from there.
And have you always worked at SIU since following schooling, or is this something that you came back to?
Good question. No. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree in architecture studies in 1979, and I also acquired my associate degree that same summer, mm-hmm. The first thing my girlfriend and I did is that we packed our bags and spent 3 months traveling through Europe.
Oh, that's great.
Touching into Africa, making it all the way to Istanbul, mm-hmm. Up into the Norwegian countries. We tried to get into Russia at that time on a day pass, but they only do that in the summertime. So when we came back, she was pregnant and I needed a job. So I packed up my portfolio. I put my nicest pair of pants on and a nice sweater on, and put got my resume out, and I went knocking door to door for architecture firms. Well, it's pretty sad, I didn't get anywhere. I remember going to Dale Lovelace, and he said he would hire me immediately. And then I walked into Knack and Associates, and I landed a job there. And I worked for Bob Knack for about 10 years, but full-time for a couple years. Then Gene Trotter was head of the architecture program, and they had a faculty member go on medical leave in the winter semester. Well, he called me up and asked me if I'd like to teach. So I was offered to teach a specification course and a working drawings course, and I kept my job still. And I let that happen for a couple years, and then I was asked to, and then the position opened up as a visiting lecturer, so I applied, got that, and then it opened up as a faculty tenure track. After about 6 years of working as a term employee, I got that, and it just kept going from there until I'm full professor now and enjoying it, and it's still loving to teach. This is my 41st year of teaching, and my goal is to reach 50 years. There was a gentleman, I always used to watch him. I don't know his name. He taught physiology. His office was in the Wheeler Hall. He took little tiny steps. He was 98 or something. And it would take him 20 minutes to get from the flagpole to Wheeler Hall. But I would go, that's the kind of guy I want to be still teaching, hopefully interesting at the same time.
I mean, that's admirable, John, and it's very real. I mean, we haven't had a whole lot of interactions, but what we have had, they've all been pleasant. And this here now, right, I can see what it would be like to be captivated by Jon Davey talking about architecture in a lecture hall, right? Like I could latch onto that, right? And is that something that you feel like just that the performative aspect to pedagogy, is that something that you would have kind of picked up from your dad along the way?
Oh, I'm sure I picked it up from my dad and from my grandfather. I remember my dad bringing home Toastmaster trophies this tall.
Oh yeah.
I mean, so he was a great sophist. He wasn't a deep philosopher. He wasn't a deep theologian, but if you needed somebody to argue, he was very good at doing that and intimidate you.
Oh, that's too funny.
I think it's just a natural attribute for me to stand in front of an audience and talk.
Yeah.
And the thing that I had added to my lectures in history is that I decided I would dress up like certain characters. So years ago, when I was introducing ancient Greek architecture, I would come in there with my split nylon running pants and my Nike running shoes and tank top and talk about marathon running and architecture. When I talked about Romanesque architecture, I have a monk's habit that I wear. When I talked about Byzantine architecture, I dressed up as King Solomon for Hagia Sophia and Justinian, the lawgiver. Even when I dress up, giving a lecture on Albert Speer, the Nazi architect, there were times I dressed up that were pretty scary looking.
Oof.
But I do a big disclaimer in front of the class.
That's reasonable. But I mean, these are historical things that happen in a particular way, and if you are studying them in a particular way, you're trying to provide somebody the full depth of character that's associated with that activity. Not easy, I have no doubt, but adds to it.
Yeah. I mean, when I introduced that lecture, prior to that, I talk about my friend, the old girlfriend, that her father was a World War II POW. He was captured by the Germans as he was leaving Paris. He was a scout for General Patton, and he ended up from November 44 to April 45 in a POW camp in Poland. So we talked a lot. When I would come home and visit, he opened up and talked to me a lot about being in the prison camp. He actually won a Bronze Star. And the second, when I was in Germany, I had the opportunity. I didn't want to go for a long time to visit Dachau, and someone said, "You really need to go take a look at it, John." And so I went there, and it really made a mark on me, you know. And when I found out later, I had been stationed in Berlin first, and then I was transferred down to West Germany, and I was in a small town called Amberg that we never touched never bombed during the wars. But I found out later as I went to Washington, D.C., and I was in the Holocaust Museum, there is one place that there is a big panel, and you push it, and it lights up all of the major concentration camps, but including all the holding camps. And to my surprise, Pond Barracks, which was in Amberg, which was the 3rd of the 2nd Cab, which I belonged to, our barracks were holding camps for Jews heading to the concentration camps. I lived there for 2 years, and no one said one thing to me about it.
Wow.
You know, so I introduced that to the class, and just making a point out of it that, you know, these are things that really did happen, and we should really be sensitive about it and understand them.
How much, right? And we always think of, or there are a lot of people that think of history in the context of the interactions of the individuals, right? Or the interactions of humans and nature, or, you know, not everybody thinks of history in terms of the structures that exist in the physicality of the places that humans themselves erected, and how that represents the history that lives in that. And it sounds like that's something that really inspires kind of not just the way that you teach, but the way that you engage with the world around you and contextualize the world.
Yeah, the barracks that I lived in Berlin, they used to be the stables, and they cleaned them up. It was nice, and the swimming pool that we would, the natatorium that we go swimming in and play water soccer was the swimming pool. There's something called the Night of the Long Knives, where there were a number of German officers executed, and that was the pool they were shot in. And you've seen that picture, the blowing up of the swastika on top of a building. That was RPX. I mean, that's how close, you know, I was to history itself. We had a range for our tanks. In Berlin, we could go drive around. So with an engineering group, we'd have bulldozers out there and caterpillars, and we'd create these tank traps and have fun. Well, we did something. We were a bunch of hippies, is what we were, and we did something crazy. We went out and we carved the tank traps to spell peace. You know, facing the East German towers. You know, a brigade is 800 men. We were surrounded by 10 divisions. That's 100,000 soldiers on the outside. The joke was, if ever World War III was going to happen, they would just paint POW on Berlin Wall.
So was your time drafted spent more pointed towards the Cold War? And that time in Germany then?
But the Cold War, I am a Cold War veteran.
Okay.
I'm a Vietnam Air veteran, but I did not fight in Vietnam.
Okay.
We almost went to war in 1973 when the Egyptian-Israeli war occurred. I was in Amberg in West Germany, and we spent half our time in the field. And so all our tanks and all our equipment were painted OD camouflage, green camouflage. Well, the orders came down one day, paint everything sand color camouflage. I go, in Germany? You know, so we were getting ready to go in and fight as the second Cav in Israel. But the Israelis took care of that rather quickly. So
that's quite a quick shift to happen. I'm sure, like in your mind, like if there's a thing that really says what you're getting ready to do to redress yourself, speaks to what likelihood there is. I mean, contextualizing that and just the relevancy of the modern day conflict, and just knowing that this is not something that it is continuing to be ongoing and has been for well before even World War II. And I don't need to go down this rabbit hole on all the reading and all the contextualization of colonialization and the Middle East. But I mean, that's just a very real experience that still finds itself carrying through to this day. So just the history stuff, John. I'm really dug into this. This is cool stuff. So and I'll steer it back kind of towards the Bucky Dome for a little bit, talking about history and preservation and kind of what's been going on in the most recent times, because you guys have done everything as far up to actually getting parts of the library back into the Bucky Dome now. Yeah. And that's like that's accessible, pull it off the wall kind of history.
Yeah, we were just gifted 3,500 books. And these are books that were in Bucky's dome, in Ann's dome, and also were there in his office. Allegra Fuller, their daughter, working with her children, Jamie and Alexandra, gave us the books. And Ben Lauer, who's the artist in resident at the Religious Center, the Dome in Edwardsville, SIU Edwardsville, went out to California twice in a U-Haul to picking up the books and the artifacts. And so we now have some of the Herman Miller chairs that were originally there. We have Ann's desk that was originally there. We have the foo dogs, which are 2 purple foo dogs that when they were uncrated this last spring, it was like being, at King Tut's tomb, because they'd have been crated since 1971, and just stored away. So we're real excited about those kind of things, and more people. I've got 2 calls today for tours. I did a tour yesterday. And so it's all by calling, either myself or Judy up or any of the other board members, and we're ready to give a tour right away.
So that's a good pitch right now. Like if people want a tour, they can contact the Dome Home and get a tour.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's phenomenal to know, and I'm happy to be able to share that, and I'll probably put a little bit more content around that as well, and try and get it out there. That's what terrified me about even thinking about the copyrights going into the Bucky Dome and doing a music video, was to think of, is this fragile at this point, or is it just a perfectly livable, walkable, experiential space now as you've kind of gotten through the stages of restoration?
It is. It's a safe, well preserved. Structural wise, I remember walking in there one day. The Grammer brothers, which is 2 carpenters from Murfreesboro, I walked into the main living room area, and they had 5 miter saws, all at different angles, so they didn't have to restructure their tool. And when you looked at the ceiling and where the pentagons and the hexagons were all coming together, it looked like a fine Japanese woodwork box that you had made, almost like the Green brothers that designed the Gamble House in Pasadena, which was the actual setting for the crazy professor in Back to the Future. The house looks like you're walking into. It's beautiful. I'm going to take a step back.
Yeah, please.
The first time I came across anything Buckminster Fuller I was at Grafenwehr, which was Rommel's tank base in Germany. We would take our tanks there, and we had shooting ranges and the like, and they had a Christian coffee house there. So I ventured in there, and there was a big poster on the wall, and it was a big dandelion, and then below that were the words, let me get it straight here, to me, God is not a noun, God is a verb. And then it was kind of an apology going either way, but it was Buckminster Fuller. And I go, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then when I got out of the service, going kind of trying to get academic again at Rend Lake, I had a close friend, Mary Bork, whose nephew owns Common Grounds. Mary said, let's go down to Carbondale and listen to Bucky Fuller. And I said, I packed up my old 62 Tempest, and we drove down here, and we heard Bucky speak this was 1976, not for 1, not for 2, not for 3, not for 4, not for 5, but 6 straight hours.
Wow.
And, I remember him with the styrofoam balls and talking about packing, and you take 12 spears together and you get a tetrahedron inside. And I was just going, I don't know what he's talking about. but it was amazed. It was fun.
I don't even begin to comprehend it myself because like I said, I'm one of those folks that thinks of the world in experiences based in relationships, right? But to think of the world in experiences based in shape and matter and geography. I mean, is that something that has come natural to you, that you've been able to kind of follow on a line along, and that kind of fits you into the Buckminster Fuller project just the same? Or has this been something that you have to kind of work towards and comprehend as you yourself have had to listen to others speak?
I am right now, my goal is to read through everything Bucky has written. And I started out with Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, which was easy. I haven't got to Synergetics yet. So I'm trying to educate myself fully about that kind of thing. I miss not having him here to talk to him.
Yeah.
You know, but I've got Bill Perk. You know, that's just 1 degree of difference between Bucky. And I remember coming back from a Bucky event in East St. Louis. I was in the parking lot, the Blue Barracks parking lot, with Bill Perk until late at 12 o'clock at night, asking him questions about Bucky. And Bill was like, Bucky, he can talk for the whole day. and so I got a lot of my information, you know, from Bill Perk. Very interesting.
Well, and Bill's on my list. I've got to call him, but I got everybody's contact yesterday from Judy, and I'm going to give him a ring. I'm hoping that here in the next couple of days I'll be able to get him in here and
well, you better bring out the reel-to-reel, because he can talk a long time.
Hey, that's the beauty of digital. I think I'm going to try and get him in on a Sunday afternoon, so we've got that depth of time. And if we hit 3 hours, we hit 3 hours. If we hit 6 hours, I think this thing cuts off at 8. I think 8 hours is the extent of data that I can generate with this program at once, and I'll let it roll.
Yeah. You know, some things about Bucky that I've come across lately is in 1730, the first Fuller came to America. It was a British sailor on furlough, and he liked the colony's spirit and their desire for freedom, their desire to have their own country. So he stayed. And then I think his grandson was part of the Continental Congress, and his grandson did not sign the Constitution because there was no mention of eradicating slavery, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And then Bucky's great aunt was Margaret Fuller. She was a transcendentalist. Her good friends were Walt Whitman, who wrote Leaves of Grass, and Henry Thoreau, who wrote Walden Pond. And so when you look at Bucky, there was a book I just read, Pioneer Americans, that talks about Bucky's transcendentalism.
Yeah.
And what he's looking for is that, I'll use the term, that God molecule. But he's looking for it as a shape in nature itself, as though he could create, he would understand nature by discovering that. I mean, he's very similar to the architect Louis Sullivan, that Louis Sullivan believed that artists and architects can take something, a piece of stone, a piece of glass, something natural, and from that, it has the seed germ in it, and that artist or that architect can create something ex nihilo, out of nothingness, from just something that's bare. And I think Bucky had that idea too, just to kind of compare him with Louis Sullivan.
In that, in the simplest of business terms, right? Natural capital, right? And that to me, right here, John, of like the concept of what natural capital is, right? And natural capital is, in my mind, a very simple comparison to make is the shape of a fish applied to a vehicle for aerodynamics, right? Yeah. That is the architecture of nature applicable to the engineering of man. Yeah. That's cool.
One of the other ideas that Bucky has, it was something called tensegrity. He would make up words all the time.
Yeah.
And some of his sentences in his book would go for a page and a half. And so you've got to kind of sit there with a Bucky dictionary when you start running into some of his words. But tensegrity is looking at nature, and nature has two things that that it uses to build. One is compression, and the other is tension. And so Bucky thought that we should design things that are equal in tension and compression. And the best example of that is your own human body. Look at the young gymnast that she just broke
Simone Biles, yes.
broke the record of so many flips and what have you. I mean, that body, the bones are all in compression, the ligaments and muscles and tendons are all in tension, and she can do those wonderful, fantastic things with her body. That's amazing to me. And that's nature, you know, kind of leading the way.
That's wild to think about. And like I've always kind of, conceptualized like what are some of the basic tenets to construction that I understand, and one of the few things of them, I'm a terrible homeowner, is compression strength and tensile strength, right? I understand the difference between the ability of rubber to flex it and concrete to hold strong, right? And to think that the human body itself is both capable of that compression and that tensile, and that defines some of the applicable abilities that we have as folks. And I'm sure that even goes into deeper of how the body is then used to produce architecture itself. And I'm thinking of just something that's simple for everybody to grasp on is the Egyptian pyramids, right? And it's like, how did we as human beings construct something like that in a world with rudimentary tools? And that goes back to the capacity of the human body to both be compressive and tense in both of its strengths.
Well, I came across something the other day that when Bucky was young, he had bad eyesight. Some say he was nearsighted, some say he was farsighted. All I know is he had bad eyesight. One of the first gifts he worked with were the Froebel gifts. Froebel was he studied crystals, not New Age Christology, but crystals, actual crystals. He was in Prussia, and he created a set of gifts and occupations. Gifts are like we would call visual aids in education today, and occupation would be the lecture guide, the curriculum guide. And the first one is you would have a sphere, and when a baby or a 2-year-old plays with a sphere, they would realize that there are no right angles or no flat surfaces, that everything is continuous, that everything affects each other. And almost like a futurist, that you put your hand behind your back and wiggle your little finger, it affects the furthest quasar in space. And then the second gift was you had a cube and you had a sphere. Well, the sphere can't be the cube and the cube can't be the sphere, but if you create a cylinder, and one way you can hold the cylinder and you can see that it looks like a sphere, but the other way you hold it, it looks like a cube. And so basically what Froebel was arguing, that young child was learning relativity, that it's not square, it's not round, it's both the same thing. It's not black, it's not white, it's gray. It's not yes, it's not no, it's almost the same thing. And Bucky played with one of those 21 different gifts and occupations that his mother got him. And that was, he had dry peas with toothpicks, and one of the first things he built was a tetrahedron oxent, if I get it right, a triangle mechanism that was with him for the rest of his life. He invented, he was also a very questioning student. I mean, there were times that he would make people very aggravated. But he would question all that all the time. The family owned an island in Penobscot Bay called Bear Island, and Bucky would have to row in every day, I think 2 miles, to pick up groceries, to pick up the mail and row back again. I mean, also through the fog and through choppy waters and what have you. So one of the first things he invented was, it looked like a long stick, and it would actually pull it towards you while it's in the water, and it poured towards you, it would collapse. But then when you push it back against the water, it would open up, almost just like a squid. And he could then look forward instead of looking backward in his rowboat, pushing the device and see where he was going. That was one of the first things he ever designed, and I think it's pretty neat. But he had a love for the sea. And even on his tombstone, rather on the tombstone of he and Anne, there's the word trim tab, and the trim tab is a little bitty rudder on the larger rudder, and it's not only on huge ships, but it's on airplanes too.
Yeah.
And that little bitty rudder helps sway the big rudder in place by just doing a little tiny thing. And the analogy or the metaphor that Bucky was going after, that we need to be trim tabs. Maybe I do just such a very little bit of thing, but I can have an effect upon, my house, my street, my block, my city, my community, my country, what have you, and the universe, as Bucky did. One of the things why he got to the dome is he started out going to Harvard. He had lost his father to a number of years of a stroke, and Bucky actually took care of his dad. So he became a caregiver early on. And his father passed away. The families got together and enough money for him to go to Harvard. He'd gone to a previous university, made the football team, made the quarterback team as the quarterback, but you had to supply your own helmet. And at that time, they were leather helmets. Well, Bucky's mom was pretty poor at that time, and Milford, I think, was the name of the school he was attending. And so she sewed him a helmet out of cloth. I can't imagine that. But then when Bucky broke a bone, because he wanted to be on the Harvard football team, but couldn't do that. When while he was at Harvard, his aunt was nearby and had a Great Dane, and he would walk the dog around campus. Well, at that time, the Siegfried Follies, with Marilyn Miller as the major chorus girl, was in Massachusetts at that time. So Bucky became acquainted with them because of the dog. And so when he reached the first semester, halfway through the semester in Harvard, he was bored to death. So he went to the bank, took out all the money from the bank, went to New York City, got an apartment, and tracked down Marilyn Miller and the Siegfried Follies, and took them out drinking until they ran out of money. The family wasn't happy, so they sentenced him to go to Canada to a cotton mill that had just received machines from Europe, that the instructions were either German or French, and they couldn't figure out how to get them working properly. Bucky was in hog heaven. I mean, he spent time doing that, and it was very successful. Came back to Harvard again and just quit.
I want to take a step back for a second. And these stories, are they coming from books? Are they coming from Bill? Are they coming from Bucky? Like, where does your knowledge of these stories originate?
A lot from Bill.
Okay.
A lot from Bill. Books. Oh gosh, what I'm reading right now is where I get the information about his activities when he was younger in school. Okay. But I kind of already heard some of these things before.
Well, that's why it
books
sounds so
mostly, and talking to Thomas Zung, who was part of the architecture Fuller's architecture firm. Bill Perk for sure. Other people who knew him, Larry Bush for sure. And then other people from the design department. I didn't know when I was working on my master's degree in environmental design that what I was getting was comprehensive anticipatory design scientists. When I see people like Bob Swinson, the architect, Thad Heckman, the architect, Jon Davey, the architect, we think differently because of our design background. Not any better, not any worse, but differently when we come to solve a problem. And I think it's that comprehensive design, anticipatory design science background.
And that kind of guides me into something that's also been itching at the back of my mind, which is the network of architects. Because it seems like architects are pretty well close to one another, right? I've always worked in the media industry, and you'd be surprised at how close everybody is in like local television stations, and how you're just one hop away from somebody in Southern Illinois at a television station, being connected to somebody at the largest television station in New York City or Los Angeles or what have you, right? So very very tight knit, just based on profession. Is that something that you've experienced as well here in Southern Illinois? Is a closeness of just the architecture community?
I started something 31 years ago called Kid Architecture, which was a camp to teach young kids about architecture.
Yeah, I've delivered you guys Chinese food before.
And where I got that idea is that there was an American Institute of Architects meeting, and I was an associate member, and there was an architect from mid-state that had acquired a grant from the Illinois Arts Council to be a resident architect at a grade school for a semester. And I just thought, that's just great. And I thought, well, I'll just write a grant, and see what happens. And I was teaching at that time. And my other concern was that I'd been teaching about 10 years, and I'd ask somebody, why did you choose architecture? Oh, Dad says I can draw. Or why did you choose interior design? Or Mom said I can pick out colors. And I'm going, that's not a reason to choose a vocation. I mean, it's about design. And so I thought, what we do in 4 years at SIU, I'll try to do in 1 week with grade school kids. Wrote the grant from Illinois Arts Council, was awarded the grant, and started doing that. But and ever since that time, for the last 31 years, the local chapter of the American Institute of Architects has contributed scholarship money for kids to come to the camp itself. And that also, too, the AIA Illinois and our regional or section, the Prairie section, they all gave money for the restoration of the dome because they recognize it's something worthwhile to keep, not only just the architecture itself, but the thinking, the concepts, and the ideas of Mr. Fuller too.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct, and that's a really cool way to contextualize the question of what is closeness, that it's more than just being professionals that rub elbows, that you guys are all able to come together and push cause that is tied to so many different facets of what it is to do what architects do. I can't really sit here and be like, I know what an architect does, but but just to know that you guys are pushing the concept and the value of what skills and what ways you think about just building structures and how that all kind of ties together. I appreciate that.
Well,
which leads me back to another Buckminster Fuller question that I've again had itching in the back of my head during our conversation, is what the network of Buckminster Fuller organizations looks like, whether it's around the country or around the world, or kind of how all those relationships exist and how they cross paths.
Okay. I've had the opportunity of having to go through tenure and promotion and publishing papers and chapters in books and the like, and then having the opportunity to present them around the world. And be I in Egypt or Indonesia or India, and I come to the stage and I present my paper, and I may mention I'm from SIU, and the first thing people say is that, oh, Buckminster Fuller, and he is known around the world to have been here for his 10 years at SIU. I remember I went up to look at the architecture at Chandigarh, which was the new capital of Punjab, that region, a province in India, that occurred during the Indian partition, when there was the breaking away of the Muslims, went into Pakistan, and the Sikhs came back into India. That I went there for the visit to see the architecture, and they took me to the School of Architecture there. And what's out in front? A Gizik dome. It's just that kind of small things. Then two years ago, I was in Singapore delivering a paper about teaching the online graduate education in architecture, and there was a professor there from Poland delivering a paper on Buckminster Fuller. So we got to talking. He goes, well, you need to come out in 2019 in September, because we at Wark Hall University are having a Fuller week there with presentations and discussions and activity. And I also found that Jamie Allegra's son, Bucky's grandson was going to be there too. So we packed up our bags, and because that never, I never thought of Poland, but they were enriched in Buckminster Fuller and the things he was doing. My big problem when we went there, I didn't read things carefully, and so we ended up. We went to War Hall, beautiful city. Went down the next morning to catch a cab to the university. I gave the taxi, the address, and he looks at me and goes, "This is not in War Hall. That's in Krakow." I go, "Well, how far is that to get to Krakow?" He goes, $400 round trip. And I looked at Barbara and I said, I have to be there. I mean, I got to meet Jamie, and because that was during the time that we were beginning to talk about the donation, the gifting of the books and the artifacts, and I need to make the presence of the dome to Jamie, right there. It was important for us to go. So $400 down the way.
It feels almost movie-esque, John. Like it feels like like a I don't know. Catch Me If You Can is just the movie that comes to mind. Like I envision, stepping off of a plane and like out into the taxi area and like having to jet off and making the decision, and you zip away for $400 to however far you've had to go, and then you jump out of the cab and now you're there and you're hustling up to get to Jamie, and we gotta have the talk about the importance of the collection and the legacy, and
All I did, I had time to make the presentation and meet Jamie and then leave.
And then you're right back out.
But there is a network. Part of it is through the Buckminster Fuller Institute, which Jamie Snyder, Allegra's son, started. We've got relationships with them. We have a relationship with Ben Lauer with the Edwardsville campus, with the dome in Edwardsville, that actually Fuller, Seiji Suzawa, and Thomas Zung designed. Seiji Suzawa and Thomas Zung was a student, and then Fuller designed the Montreal Dome. And if you have never been able to visit that, go, because it feels like you're walking into a great European cathedral. I mean, it's fantastic inside.
So one thing to note about the designing of a dome, it's not like there's just this geodesic dome design and you can go scale it up and down however you see fit and drop it in place. Does it have to be a very unique design per space to achieve a particular function, or how does that work? That's a curiosity of mine as well in this conversation.
Well, there's a couple things. If you're a tall person and you got your bed next to the wall, the wall is not going vertical. The wall is doing this. So you can bump your head a lot. And then if you're a person who has a lot of framed artwork, it doesn't hang very well at all. I mean, that's why the artwork that we see in Bucky's house is sculpture hanging from the ceiling itself. So it's a different place to be. It's volumetric. Okay. I took a young lady on a tour yesterday, and the first thing she said, she goes, "You can feel the volume," as opposed to these rectilinear walls. I mean, they define space, but when you're in the volume, it's a completely different feeling. Also, too, the first house I almost bought, there was a gentleman, Ed Cook, who's a carpenter, who actually came when he got out of the Navy. He came to SIU just to study under Bucky, and he built a dome out at Crab Orchard trailer lot out there. And it was a nice wooden dome, and I was talking with him, and next door was this kind of a flowing sea of dried concrete with some plastic CPU tubing coming out. I go, "Well, what happened there?" And he goes, "Well, a bunch of hippy dippies one day wanted to build their own dome. So they called the ready mix up, brought out, a couple yards of concrete. They just poured it on top of the grass before the concrete was still green. They put in the PCV tubes, lashed them together, put chicken wire on the top of it, and sprayed it with foam. And had a fireplace with a flue come up for their house. That's where they lived. It was kind of like drop dome, drop city. Instant pop up dome. Yeah. And they didn't realize that the foam on the roof and the heat from the flue would catch fire, and it did, so it burnt down.
Oh no.
Yeah, but that's kind of that spark, that craziness that was occurring, with Bucky here at that
Yeah.
time. When he was in New York City, there was a bohemian club, bar, lounge, like, I was just reading this, but it was where he met Noguchi, the famous sculptor. That we have a sculpture of a bust of Bucky in Morris Library by Noguchi.
That is okay. I didn't realize that
Yep.
that was okay.
And that table that looks like a curved triangle with legs that kind of go up and down, very fancy piece of, that's the Noguchi also. And so Bucky and Noguchi hung together in the bar, but it was known as the Bohemian Bar, with the intelligentsia of New York City would hang out there. And it was in Soho too.
So, and these are the type of things that, I mean, when would the FBI have been keeping tabs on Buckminster Fuller? I know that's something that has become kind of a topic of conversation in recent years.
Well, it's not surprising. Frank Lloyd Wright, J. Edgar Hoover despised Frank Lloyd Wright. Here was a gentleman that his last wife, Gigavana, was from Eastern Europe, an immigrant, I think an undocumented immigrant also. And also Bucky, if you went to school at Taliesin, it was a commune. And so that smelled a lot like socialism and communism to J. Edgar Hoover. And I'm sure Bucky's the same way.
Yeah.
That actually, I did read somewhere they were investigating him for some purpose. I'm not sure. But that doesn't surprise me. I have a friend in town that worked for the forensic folks in town, and I have been running trips to Cuba, travel study programs to Cuba, and also giving papers in tomb papers in Russia. And I was told, they've got your number, John. They're watching you. So okay, so what?
That's too good.
At least I'm amongst the good crowd.
Yeah, right. Like if I'm going to be on a list, I'm going to be on a list here. You were talking about trim tab earlier as well, and it's funny. It's kind of just as we've gone through the conversation, I've just had all these things kind of light bulbs going off in my brain over time, and like, oh, this ties back to this question or that, and the trim tab thing ties directly into how I first kind of made my acquaintance with the Dome Home and the board on a whim. when I fired up the Facebook event for inviting oh my gosh, why Jeff? I wanted to call him John for a second. Inviting Jeff Bridges to visit the Bucky home, and I appreciate you guys embracing that after realizing that I was coming from a positive place.
Absolutely, yeah.
To latch into that, and it was such an experience to work to kind of put these different things together. The books so it's Carrie and who else that had written the book?
Thad Heckman.
So Carrie and Thad is here. Carrie is elsewhere.
Carrie's in Virginia.
Okay.
And now that he took his second shot, he wants to make his way here.
Good. Hey, when he shows up, I will get him on the podcast as well.
Yeah, he's Les Odell's brother.
Really?
Yeah, and their sister just opened Two Peas and a
Two beans in a bug. Yep. Huh.
So there's a lot of connection here.
Yeah, man, it's just wild how this all comes through. Well, I've even kind of got in the back of my head. I'm far kin to the Bushes of Dean Bush construction and on down, and I don't know that Larry Bush is related to that clan or not, but like just you hear names and things start to click, and now that you're saying, oh yeah, it's Les's brothers. Hello, how did I not at some point in time go, oh yeah, of course Carrie Odell would be related to Les here. Just kind of comes together.
One of the big things that recently I've been to solidify this is Bucky lost a daughter in 1920. She had infantile paralysis, polio. She had influenza at the same time. She suffered for 4 years. Again, Bucky was the caretaker again. And then she died, and it broke his heart. And he took it upon himself. The story goes that he did not provide her proper shelter. And as far as the story goes, that he and his wife are up at Chicago. It was a cold winter day, and he made the calculations of how many clothes he would have to put on to be soaking wet, that if he walked into Lake Michigan, he would drown. And then he had an aha, some bright light, some electric moment that why am I using and destroying this body? And he made the observation that Bucky belongs to the universe. I mean, he doesn't have, it's not his responsibility. He can't get rid of himself. I mean, and so he dedicated himself to solving problems such as shelter.
Yeah.
And then he didn't speak, didn't work for 2 more years, as the story goes. And he questioned everything. And then he started speaking. And then, like when I heard him speak for 6 straight hours, the longest I'd heard a story that he knew he was being recorded because he could see the red light on the camera, that he spoke for 30 straight hours after someone asked him a question that dealt with how did the universe begin? So he was good at telling and putting things together. Yeah. And also, too, when you look at the books that he read, there's annotations everywhere in all the books and things he thought about and that he used in his thinking across the board. So what happened was Bucky was kind of on the circuit, presenting his ideas and talking to schools and anybody who would hear him. And Black Mountain College started with Joseph Albers. He was part of the Bauhaus School of Architecture and Art, which started in Weimar, went to Dessau, and then ended up in Berlin. And then the majority of those instructors were of Jewish background. And they could smell from 1933 on that Germany was not the correct place to hang out. Yeah. And one of the first people to leave was Eric Mendelssohn, who came to St. Louis, and he's the architect who designed the new contemporary, which is now an art and a black box theater at University City. He designed that first synagogue, breaking away from the dome-shaped synagogues and kind of a new, different Judaism, per se. That other people came, such as Joseph Albers, and that summer, in the 40s, late 40s, Paul Goldberg, who designed the Marina Towers, the two skyscrapers on the river in Chicago that look like corn cobs. He was supposed to come to teach that summer, but he said there's a new up-and-coming young man, he's not well known yet, but his name is Buckminster Fuller. So they brought Bucky in that first summer. They loved him, and he introduced all his geodesic thinking to him, his tensegrity thinking to him, his synergetic thinking to the students. He came back another year, and then one of the other Bauhaus faculty and Mahogany ended up starting the Institute of Design in Chicago, the second Bauhaus. It then became Illinois Institute of Technology. Mies van der Rohe came over, was part of the school, even though Mahogany and Mies didn't talk or didn't get along at all. But Cohen was a student who actually came down to Carbondale. He was a hire by Dwight Morris as to start the design department, and who the dean was Schrack, which we have Schrack Auditorium. So while Cohen was at IIT, Bucky came to speak, and they hit it off as great friends. And then when Bucky's apartment caught fire in the mid-50s, with all of his models, his tetrahedrons and dodecahedrons and the other shapes, he needed somebody to help rebuild all of them. So he called up Cohen and asked, "Can I come and you have some students?" So Bucky came here between 1956 and 1959, and he was hired first off in the summer as a visiting lecturer. I've actually seen the contract for $3,000 a month. But later, when Dwight Morris was wanting SIU to grow, he brought in people as research professors. An example of that was Buckminster Fuller. And basically asked him, I'd like you to stay on campus 2 months of the year. The rest of the time, you're a free-range chicken. Do what you want. And so in 1960, Bucky wanted to put his mouth, put where his money was, or his money where his mouth was, or practice what he preached. He built a geodesic dome, on South 4th Street, with the students helping put it up. Because he wanted to just make a statement that this is the least amount of materials for the greatest amount of strength. And that's what's unique about the dome itself. It's a different kind of living element.
Jon, I hate to cut this episode short. We will have continuing conversation. I try and keep these around an hour. There is so much more than an hour here, folks. Yeah. Which is why episode 64 will find itself paired with another episode down the line where we talk to Jon Davey just a little bit more about a lot more things. And that said, let's get out of here. Have a good one, folks.
Thank you.
Whatever that one.
Thank you very much. But again, have a long tape for Bill Perk.
I'm going to. I promise you. I promise you.
Thank you very much, Nathan.
Absolutely. Have a good one, folks. Whatever that one may be.